Right. Well, first off, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. And I want to thank Steve Fabus. Who you've been listening to since 5:30, and he'll continue DJing after we're done talking. Steve has lived in the neighborhood since 1999, and he has been in the city since the mid-70s DJing, and was a friend of Patrick's. Played the end up for Patrick Cowley's party with the Patrick Cowley Singers. And if you read Patrick Cowley's journal, there's another Steve connection in there too. So, and
that kind of connection.
Yeah. You can ask Steve about that. And Maurice Tani, I'm so lucky to have met Maurice back in 2009. And Maurice and Patrick shared a studio together just one block or a few blocks past Mission on Minna, and other studios before that, which we'll get into. And Maurice still plays music all over the Bay, and I guess let's just get into it. Okay, so Patrick Cowley moved to San Francisco from Buffalo in 1971. He was 21 years old. He was living in like kind of like a commune-esque house with 6 other people, kind of adjacent to the Cockettes, and just kind of getting into the whole, performance scene here, and quickly made friends with musicians. He was a drummer back in Buffalo and had come to the city and enrolled at CCSF, which is where he met Maurice. And I guess we can talk about how you met Patrick and the early days.
Sure. I met Patrick when I was a music major, and we were one of the classes that, as a music major, I guess it was required at the time, was electronic music. And electronic music was a pretty esoteric sort of thing at the time. Patrick was, electronic music was basically synthesizers and tape machines. In electronic music in 1972 or 73 consisted of 2 basic disciplines. One was how to operate an electronic music synthesizer, and the other was how to splice tape, because the synthesizers themselves weren't really, they were pretty primitive at the time. So the method for making music with synthesizers generally consisted of making small noises, blips and squeaks, we call them, and then you record that onto tape, and then you take that blip, cut it out, and assemble it onto a master tape, and then you come up with this sequence of tapes. And this is kind of how electronic music, like Morton Subotnick stuff, or the avant-garde music of the time was created. And so Patrick was, I forgot the actual title of what it was, but there's a synthesizer lab at City College, and there was, which basically consisted of one large room and then a few smaller kind of telephone booth-sized rooms that contained small synthesizers and a tape deck, and then a larger room with a larger modular synthesizer setup and a larger 4-track Ampex tape recorder, quite a large beast at the time. And Patrick was the student, I forgot the actual term for it, but rather than have a teacher there running the lab, they would have a student assigned to run the lab, usually a second-year student who had some idea of what this equipment was about. So Patrick was that guy, and he had and so he had the keys to the lab. And at whatever the closing time was, which was on 7:30 or 8 o'clock, the last student would leave. Patrick had the keys, and we could stay there all night. We had access to this equipment that was extremely expensive stuff that none of us could have afforded. The synthesizer was a few $1,000s worth of modular gear, and the tape machine itself was a 4-track Ampex, which at the time those machines were about $1,000 a track, and so that was a $4,000 tape machine to be able to play with. And so that's when I met Patrick, and we worked the first year of our working was there at City College until we met Art Adcock, and Art had a little bit of money and bought himself a new state-of-the-art synthesizer and a small tape machine that changed the course of music production, really, the TAC 3340. This was whereas that 4-track machine that I was talking about in the lab was about the size of a small refrigerator, or at least a washing machine. It was about that big. This was a machine that was about 1/3 of the price and about the size of a large normal consumer tape deck. And it brought what I would consider the kind of the democratization of the recording process to just about everybody, which has extended all the way to today, that going from 4-track machines into 8-track machines and cassette machines that could record 8 tracks at a time, all the way into Pro Tools and the other computer-based machines, to the point where you can now record your album on your smartphone. This was the beginning of that journey, early 70s, because before that time, the recording process was such that it was something that was done in a professional studio, a very expensive, multi-million-dollar facility run by guys in lab coats, and the musicians would stay in the big room where you'd play the instruments, and then they'd play it back to you over the speakers, and maybe you got to go up to the control room and look at the knobs and faders up there, but yeah, it was a process that you weren't really a part of. So Patrick was right at the beginning of this. It was all still unformed. All the equipment was in flux, and the music was in flux. We were synthesizers were. You didn't see synthesizers out in live concerts at the time because they were so unstable still. And when I say unstable, the synthesizers that we started working with, that Patrick started with, was what was called a Putney, EMS something or other, and it was a small machine that had all the kind of a sampler of the basic components of a large university-style Buchla or Moog synthesizer modular setup. But this was a small thing, and it had 2, maybe 3 oscillators in it, and a low-frequency oscillator, a voltage-controllable filter, a couple of voltage-controllable amplifiers, the basic components of a synthesizer that you could work with in this small thing. But it was so unstable that, as a matter of fact, it didn't come with a keyboard. It had a button on it. And you'd set up these sounds, the blip or the squeak I was talking about, and you'd press a button, it would make the blip or the squeak, and you'd record it. I had a joystick too, and a lot of knobs on it, but it was so unstable you couldn't. When you did hook up a keyboard to it, you had to tune the keyboard, and you had to secondarily tune the keyboard so that the scale from C to C was actually C to C. And to make matters more frustrating was that as the machine warmed up, the tuning would slip, and so it was only good for sometimes 5 minutes. So it wasn't something that you could really take on stage with you. This was all music that was made for maybe in universities, and you would just kind of, if you were going to use the keyboard, you got it to work. Hopefully you recorded it, and then you went back to tuning it again. So it wasn't something that you were going to use live a lot.
Well, I'm going to play a piece of music that was recorded live with Maurice and Patrick in 1973 at CCSF that It's never been heard before. I just dug it up. So I guess also the backstory with how I met Maurice is in 2007, Honey Sound System, which was a DJ collective that I used to be part of, was contacted by John Hedges, who was the last owner of Megatone Records, and he was retiring to Palm Springs, and he was inviting all the local DJs to come over and take his records. He didn't want to bring them to Palm Springs. So we were the new kids on the block, so he invited us over last, and there were 2 crates of tapes, and Ken, who is here actually today, was there and saw the tapes and was like, we're gonna take the tapes, and 2 of the tapes had Patrick's handwriting and had song titles. I brought one of them today to show you. This is one of the tapes that Ken actually had transferred because it said Patrick Cowley and it had all these song titles that we were not familiar with. And on the bottom it says, music by Patrick Cowley, Maurice Tani, and Art Adcock. And so I went on Google and looked up Maurice Tani and found his Facebook and sent him a message and said, hey, I found this tape with your name on it. Do you know who Patrick Cowley is? I said, what? So
out of the blue, I get this message from Josh. And I'm a guy kind of saves stuff, and at that point I hadn't been using tape for about 10 years, but my attic was full of old tape, and Josh came over and dug through reel after reel after reel after reel of tape, and then I guess you took it over to Fantasy and had the tape baked. The tape deteriorates after a certain amount of time, especially if it's been sitting in someone's attic. So they take it and they put it into an oven and they raise the temperature up, I don't know, to like, not very high, about 100 degrees or something, and bake it for a little while, and then one spin on the tape machine and digitize it from there, and who knows what happens to it after that. But this is really, this stuff had sat dormant for, I don't know, 30 years or something, and only through Josh's interest in this stuff that is this stuff living again, and I'll just poke this in right now. Thank you, Josh, for stirring up the interest in particularly what Patrick was doing at the time, because it was groundbreaking on some levels. I listen to it now, and it's I'm filled with all the images of what it was like when we were doing it, but taken in context of the time that this was going on, it was this was on the edge. Some of it is pretty cool, some of it's silly, and some of it is it's all fun though.
All right, well, let's listen to this live concert at CCSF. Patrick, Maurice, and Art. This was with Jerry Mueller's, I think it was the Electronic Music Lab.
Yeah, this was like the year-end concert, and I think if you're going to play what I think you're going to play, this is a piece that Patrick had written, and that he and with some help from Art and I had laid out on tape, sort of using multi-track, and but this was taking that thing, like I said, because it was so difficult to recreate this stuff with the synthesizers that were so unstable at the time. We did this with the brand new synthesizers that Arthur had gotten, which were much more stable. And so this was like, I think, the only live performance of this piece of music. It's got a lot of sound effects and stuff in it. It was cool.
Let's see if this works. you go. So I mean, that was like taken from the tape was, I think, maybe 30 minutes. It was a very long time.
Yeah, well, that wasn't the section I was trying to remember, but yeah, there was some big crescendo that happened there. What was this? This was like 1974?
73, it said.
73.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, so those were the early days. I guess we can move to what happened after you became friends with these two guys and were working at the university, and then you decided to get your own studio.
Yeah, this was San Francisco was, I suppose, a very different place at the time. It was San Francisco was a place that was that most people I knew in San Francisco came from somewhere else, and it was a friendly, easy place to come to. You could live here pretty cheaply at the time, and so. And not have to, Pat's basic MO, as was mine at the time, was you'd work some job for a little while and then quit and coast on that money and do art at the same time. And it was kind of a magical time in terms of the culture involved. It was a great place to come if you were gay. It was a great place to come if you were hippies, and it was a great place to come if you were some type of into particular religions or whatever. And all those things kind of blended together. The theater scene, the music scene, were all intertwined. And so we after. I'm going to stop this phone from buzzing. It's making me feel good. Okay. Patrick was involved in kind of. Well, I'm going to try to keep this to Patrick as much as possible. Patrick was the sort of guy that he was very giving. He was very kind. He was very generous with his talent. And when Patrick would see something that was going on that was creative, that he thought he could add to, that he could improve upon whatever was going on, he would go there and contribute his talent, and which generally involved the studio. And so all this stuff came through the studio with us, theatrical stuff, or drag shows, or radio things, and so he was right. And I think that it extended to he didn't particularly like the music in the bathhouses, and so he created his own music for the bathhouses. Which is funny because a lot of the collaboration we did. We had this small studio, and it was set up so that initially that the three of us worked together quite a bit, but rapidly it became, we found that we paired off. Two of us would work at a time. And then we divided up the studio time to, I was like 2 or 3 days, Patrick basically had the studio. 2 or 3 days, I had the studio. Art would have the studio. Art was Art's equipment, so he basically had it all the time. And but we would help each other. And so I played on a lot of Patrick's material, but there was so much happening at the time. Often I would play on a track, and I would never hear it again. I'd just go and do the track, and then he'd go and do whatever he was going to do with the thing, and then. And that's why it was funny when you came up with that record of porn music that he had done, and I didn't really think about where any of that, some of that stuff had gone, but so that's where it went, to the gay porn. So I didn't realize, but yes, I have a career in gay porn music, and I'm quite proud of it. Thank you. Thank you for bringing it to my attention.
Well, I was listening to all these songs, and the funkier ones, I was like, Patrick didn't really play bass. He didn't, he played drums. He would do synthesized bass, but he wouldn't.
He played a little bit of guitar too, but generally the bass parts I would do.
So I was checking with Maurice, and you know, most of these tapes, the earlier tapes at least, came from his attic. So let's play one of the songs from the second compilation of porn soundtracks, which is called Muscle Up, and this is a song called Don't Ask that has Maurice on bass.
Some of these songs, I never heard the final versions of it, and when you would play them for me, sometimes I barely recognized the track, but I could recognize my own playing.
Right. All right, let's see. And then, you know, going through these tapes, I found a demo version of that. It says August 19th, 1974, which I guess was just the date it was recorded. So I'll play that for you too. Very different sounding
I think we were listening to a lot of Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock.
So there you go, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny for me to hear, because this is the stuff that kind of preceded the Hi-NRG, the actual hard dance music, and this was, you can hear all the kind of the frosting that goes on top of those dance tracks without so much of the you know, the pounding, the pulsating beat underneath it. But the stuff that Patrick initially did for by the time he got to Sylvester, it was a lot of this kind of sequencer, swirly, sparkly stuff that happened on top of the tracks, which is what I hear in here at the time. Besides the fact that they're horrible mixes and bad mastering.
Probably no mastering whatsoever. But do you want to talk about Short Circuit Productions?
Short Circuit was you know, the question became, once we finished with school, what could we do with this stuff? What could we do with these just odd synthesizer noises? And at the time, we put together a little production company called Short Circuit. And our the primary thing that we did was the stuff you hear on the radio, you know, and they're called stingers, and it's that stuff that happens, you know, like right before the sports report comes on, or right before the traffic report, or before you know, DJ, and it's usually something that lasts 2, 3, 5 seconds maybe. Sports, you know, and so we did a bunch of that stuff, but it was attractive to we worked for KFRC here in San Francisco for a couple of years, and the KFRC at the time was the biggest main market station in the country. It had the largest market share of any station, I think at very least west of the Mississippi. And so they were always looking for something that was sort of cutting edge, sounded space age, you know, up to date synthesizer kind of stuff.
KFRC.
Right, we did a lot of that stuff, and some commercials and other things when. And so yeah, Patrick Art and I did a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, even on this reel I have, it says on the bottom, copyright 1976, Short Circuit Productions. So when I was going through all the tapes in Maurice's attic, I found this jingle that they did, like kind of a promo to kind of sell Short Circuit Productions.
This
if you
is
wanted
going to be embarrassing as well.
You may recognize the voice.
I'm here for the embarrassment.
Everyone knows in a commercial format you need something to grab the listener's attention. What Short Circuit is offering is not only high quality material at a very reasonable price, but something a little different, something newer, more up to date with the music and listeners of today. We're offering all stations, from the largest budgeted to the small and medium-sized stations who can't afford a comparable $4,000 to $5,000 package. Quality, quantity, and that taste of the unique that will set your station apart from the competition with their old-style material that has remained unchanged for years. Now, we're not here to tell you that we're going to make you the #1 in your market. You have to be good yourself, but progressive material will definitely go a long way in placing you ahead of your competitors. But rather than describe the material any farther, let's listen to the parts of the package. This is our station ID logo. Notice its bright, sparkling, yet punchy sound.
Okay, I think I got the point there. Yay, station logos. That's the first time I've ever heard a station logo applauded. You are special.
Well, I feel like a lot of people don't know that Patrick, this was his field. This is kind of how his entryway into, the music production. He was, they were doing this to make some money and to kind of keep up to date with, the sounds, and this was kind of part of his story. So
we at the time of the three of us, Patrick did a lot of, like I said, theatrical projects and stuff that we could do in the studio and send out a tape, and they would use it, in a theater or whatever it was going to be. Of the three of us, I was the only one that was actually working as a musician out in bands at the time. And I was constantly trying to pull Patrick into that world. Patrick, besides being, really talented with synthesizers and with just sort of general creativity, he played drums as well. And so I would bring him into whatever kind of band situation that I could, just so we could make some money. And so we played in some show bands, and we did I brought him into this show band.
I actually have it right here.
It
was the Steve Jordan band.
That's it. It was a DJ at the time, and he had a show band that was playing at the city down in North Beach, and we needed a drummer, and I got Patrick. Twisted his arm to come and play on these shows. And Candice Vidala,
yes.
Candida
Royale,
our local porn star, was part of that, and some other people. And we worked the show at the city in the showroom, because they had a big discotheque on one floor and a showroom on the other. And that's Patrick was listening to the music upstairs, in the disco, and typical of Patrick, he thought he could do it better, and so he made up some reels of tape and brought them up to the DJ that was upstairs spinning, and the guy really liked it, and they started playing Patrick's stuff in the disco upstairs, and Patrick was doing stuff that was, I think they referred to it as top of the night disco. It was high-energy stuff that they would play further on through the night, and as sort of a peak of the evening. And that's how he met Sylvester. Sylvester was there at the club one night, and this music comes on, and he turned to his manager, Harvey Pacqua, something like that, and said, "That's what I want. I want this on my record." And it was basically, and boomsa style disco, 4 on the floor, and that's how they made the connection with Sylvester and Patrick.
Yeah, that was in North Beach at the city disco, where he was actually got a job doing the lights.
Right.
And
What we do for money.
yes, and we only learned this because of the journal that we found that was given to Teresa McGinley, who used to live here and is now in North Carolina, and she took care of Patrick until his dying day. He gave her his journal, which we published a few years ago, and inside the journal, Patrick talks about playing, with Maurice at the city, and then getting a job running the lights at the city, and then talking about seeing Sylvester perform live, and then he talks about like joining Sylvester's band. So the journal is out there if you want to read, kind of snippets of this story from Patrick's.
Some
point of
saucy
view.
stuff in there too.
Yeah, there's a lot of saucy stuff. Yeah, actually, this is actually the real journal. So this is like what we transcribed. Nothing was edited. It's completely all intact. No names were changed. Sorry. Sorry for all the lovers that he called out for getting STDs from and stuff. But, that was real.
This was an era where there wasn't really anything you could catch that couldn't be cured with a shot in the butt.
True.
So it's.
And I guess, I was going to play also another song that Maurice plays on that kind of documented Patrick's time in Soma and the bathhouses, called Thief of Love.
Huh? I haven't heard this in a while.
Yeah.
Hypnotic sort of stuff was really new at the time. This hadn't really come out in a commercial sense so much and this and all the other pieces like it were done in all in layers. These weren't created with a band all playing together at the same time. Patrick would start with a cowbell or with a tambourine or something. He generally laid down some type of percussive track, and then by the time I would get to it, there would already be this kind of basic rhythm that was going on, and then I'd just play on top of it. And as I said, I often would never hear it again. And so by the time you brought it back, he had layered all those other stuff on top of it, and it's barely recognizable to me, other than the fact that I know that's me playing. But all the other stuff that's on top of it, it was all done, and this is when we had 4-track machines. It's all done by filling up 3 tracks or 4 tracks and then bouncing it to a 2-track machine, taking the 2-track reel, putting it back on the 4-track, filling the other 2 tracks up with more stuff, bouncing it again, and it's a repeated process that you can't go back with it. It's a destructive process where you can't, you can't change anything that was already back there in those original tracks. So Patrick would make decisions, or just live with the decisions that had been made at the time, and he would, So this is it might take him all day to do 4 minutes worth of music there, and we'd be in the other room listening to this the entire day.
What is this? This is from the same session. It's about 1978, 79, so it's a little later.
This is a little bit like 8 tracks.
Yeah, this is an 8-track session.
Hypnotic stuff was interesting in that, the kind of music that had been.
But a feeling is there. It makes you like a snake itching to crawl out of that, right? And give it a whole skin. You gotta make it
by the time we got like in 1978 or in there, the music that had been in the bathhouses, it was generally the kind of pop music that you'd hear on on any top 40 radio station. They'd be playing Elton John or whatever, which at this point doesn't seem like as erotic as it might, as perhaps it could have been. And of course, so hence Patrick thought he could do this better. And this stuff, it's not something I listen to concentrating just on it. It's background music, intended as background music for the events that were going on in the bathhouse, in the barracks, or the kinds of. It was a different place at the time. And so.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a line between, Patrick going to the bathhouses frequently in Soma. Once the studio got moved to the Soma district, it was right outside was, there's a bathhouse on every corner. People were saying if you knew a gay carpenter, you could just make your bathhouse. And they would have bathhouse openings every week. There were, dozens and...
When we initially had the studio out by City College in a really funky house that we had rented out there. When we moved it, we had choices of a number of places, and we looked at industrial spaces and stuff around the city. And when we settled on the studio at 8th and Minna Street, Patrick was in heaven. It really, we could not have possibly found a better location for Patrick. He was hanging out in front of the studio as like a hay sailor. It was that was a great location.
Yeah. And so when he was contacted by John Coletti, who was the director of porn in Los Angeles, to score these silent 60 millimeter films that were sold on 8 millimeter loops without they didn't want to overdub the sex noises, and there was no plot. So he was contacted by this director, and so he was giving now that we have a whole list of Patrick's chronological songs, we know that he was pulling from these tapes that he was doing in college, even in '74 with Maurice, like Don't Ask. And then he was also composing new music that sounded more like this, kind of like, slow-mo psychedelic stuff for the soundtracks. I brought the VHS tape to show everyone. This is the very first, the actual VHS tape that for the film School Days that started it all for Patrick. And
ooh, VHS?
VHS. And these were really expensive when they first came out, and it just changed everything because you had an audio track. So this is why Patrick was contacted. So
yay, School Days.
School Days. Yeah, that's it. I guess we can also talk about Patrick's record label that he started soon after working with Sylvester. He got a lot of money for Mighty Real.
Yeah.
It went to #1. He bought a house in the Castro with the money.
It's kind of remarkable how cheap houses were at the
Yeah.
time.
And how much money you used to make off selling, if you sold 1 million records, you made a lot of money.
It's true.
Now it's not the case. So.
Yeah, so he got after Mighty Real, he got a burst of cash, bought a house and an identical studio setup to what we had been using, so that rather than being restricted to 2 or 3 days in the studio, he now had his own studio and could work 24/7. And he was really started cranking this stuff out at that point. And so he got a partner, Marty Blackman, and they formed Megatone, which and did the first record was Megatron Man, right?
Yeah, I'll play some of that because Maurice also plays bass on that song too.
this point, we had started working with drum machines, which were a huge step up from what we had been doing. Like I said, a lot of those tracks you were hearing earlier were done with Patrick laying out these rhythm tracks all by hand. With the drum machines, now we had 8-track machines, and 1 track would be used as for a sync code, a synthy sync code, which would go out to a box, which would generate MIDI, which would run a drum machine. And with the drum machine, it had 8 individual outs on it, and so you could control the snare and the hi-hat and the toms, and it never even hit the tape. It would just go straight into the mixer. So it gave us a tremendous amount of flexibility. And so this material started to sound more like songs, but it still was working with this long form extended disco mixes. And as long as these songs were, some of them would be 6-8 minutes, we'd give them to Marty, and he would find a DJ in one place or another, and he would give them a track that was already like 6 minutes long, and the guy would take it, cut it up, and back in the 60s they used to take your songs and cut your 3-minute song down to 2 minutes so it would go on the air. These guys would take your 6-minute song and turn it into a 12-minute song, or discos, right? And it kind of, so I guess so the DJ didn't have to change the records quite so often. But they would stretch these things out. And just listening to them by themselves, it's like it's going on and on and on. But on the dance floor, it builds this. You guys ever go to dance floors? It just sort of builds this tension. And whereas previously the DJs would have to do what they could kind of manually by mixing together 2 copies of the same song, or various things they would do in order to get it to stretch this stuff out, to get the moment when everybody was going to do the poppers or whatever. So yeah, that Megatron mix. That was on the Megatron Man mix that's on the record. I think there are other ones around that
they're like 10 minutes long.
10 minutes long, yeah. That's good music.
Of course, everyone knows, Patrick, his 16-minute version of I Feel Love by Donna Summer.
That was very early. That was early.
Very early, and it was rejected by Casablanca, and then right before he passed away, they decided to release it, and so that also was very, He was kind of doing all that splicing and cutting and inserting.
It's a typical stuff. Patrick, you heard something you liked, thought he could do it better, and add to it, and they didn't pay him to do that. He just thought, this is the way I hear it. He did it and sent it off, and whether they took it or not was really up to them. But that was typical of Patrick with his combination of talent and generosity. That he did this for all kinds of people, for all kinds of projects that didn't necessarily, garner any interest or whatever. It was all done purely for the art of it, and I salute you.
It's beautiful. Well, that's probably a good place to end.
Okay.
We're going to open up the floor if anyone has any questions for Maurice. Please, don't be shy.
Can I say something? Talking about Patrick's version of I Feel, of Donna Summer, I play it all the time. So I get it. So thank you.
Well, once again, thank you, Josh, for keeping all this stuff rolling and alive. It would have languished in John Hedges' basement or my attic, and but I don't get rid of anything, because you never know when somebody like this is going to come along and see the merit in it. It's interesting, kind of in a historical perspective. I kind of see this material as a marker of what San Francisco was in the 70s, and it was a magical time, magical place, and thanks for doing this. Thank you, Tenderloin Museum, for putting this on.
I'm honored to have you both. If there's any questions, I'm over here. I can bring you a microphone so everybody can hear you ask your question. Questions?
What could
from
it
the audience?
possibly be?
Nobody has any of them?
I don't have a question, I have more of an observation, and I've said this before in public, so some of you may have heard it already. I came to the Bay Area in 1978 when I went to college, and I would travel up the peninsula on weekends and visit the bathhouses, and I would hear Patrick Cowley's music playing in the bathhouses, and you'd hear that music, you'd walk down the hallway more sexily, pose against the wall more sexily. At the risk of TMI, you would do it more sexily. And he was right, that the music that all you produced was perfect for the ambiance and just the feeling. It was just perfect.
It was a soundtrack.
It was a soundtrack to your life. When I hear his music, I think of those days. I was a kid, I thought that way of life would last forever. I had no perspective, and in 1984, when Diane Feinstein closed the bathhouses, I'd go, wait, I just got here. You can't go just yet. So thank you for your contribution to that music. When I hear it, I just think of a particular moment in my life. I was at the tail end, but I'm so grateful I had at least those moments that younger people don't understand what it was like. So thank you very much.
Thank you, San Francisco, for making this a place that all this could happen in. This wasn't going to happen in St. Louis. It wasn't going to happen in just about anywhere else. But San Francisco was a place at the time that was welcoming and open-minded, and those people, those places, could all exist here and flourish. So, yeah, I'm glad you're still here with us.
Me too.
Hi, I was curious a little about Patrick's process sequencing the synthesizers. Was he the kind of person that would methodically get a sequence ready and then record it, or were you guys just like recording stuff and getting it to tape as fast as you could and just moving on?
Patrick worked pretty fast,
Yeah.
and the kind of the nature of the equipment we had, and Patrick didn't drive. Patrick took the bus everywhere, and Patrick would show up at the house, and he heard some snippet of music along the way. He'd have it in his head, and it was his day, and we'd hear him come in, and he'd sit down and start working with this little thing he had in his head, and often he wasn't a trained school musician. He was going to write down music. So it was the little piece that he remembered of what it was. And so I kind of equate it to like musical mondegreens. You know how you hear somebody say something, but you didn't hear it right? And this is the same sort of thing. He would hear some piece of music, just a little snippet of melody or rhythm or whatever, and he couldn't quite get it right, but it turned into something that was his own. And so he would lay it out, and it would happen very quickly, and stuff would get piled on it. Each layer a reaction to the previous layer, and I hope I'm answering it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Very little of it was planned out from the beginning to know where it was going to go in the end. Each thing is sort of a little journey onto its own, especially those earlier ones that are sort of hypnotic things that are tracks piled on top of each other. Because of the limitations of the equipment that we had, and a lot of equipment kind of came in and out. People would loan us stuff, and so we would be learning these pieces of gear at the time, and other pieces of gear that had just come out, and we were really kind of on the same cutting edge as the people who designed these things, like early digital sequencers. All that kind of swirly synthesizers, that kind of stuff you would hear. That came like an Oberheim sequencer that came out. We got the thing practically when the first ones came out, and we were experimenting with them just as the people who were making this stuff. So it was kind of trial and error. And Patrick was very much an intuitive sort of guy that Arthur was the guy who owned a lot of the gear. He was more likely to read the manuals and understand exactly what was going on there. Patrick never read a manual. Patrick would go in there, turn the thing on, start twisting knobs, but this is a matter of taste, right? He would find, you could trust him to find something that was going to work, and then he'd use that, and then he'd find something else that was going to work. Arthur would help him often since he knew the gear so well, he could help him find stuff, but this was all a matter of Patrick's taste. And if he didn't have such good taste, there would have been just a mess. But he would just pile stuff on top, and you'd get where he got.
Yeah, there are we found another one of his notebooks, and in there were like all synth settings with dials. Like I guess we could remember where he left the synth the last night or the drum.
Yeah, trying to get back to it.
There would just be pages of all these, where the dials are, and even some of the synths that we've seen photos of that are now in England with Ian Anthony Stevens. There's still chalk mark on like the dials where Patrick had left the last setting, or was trying to, I guess, remember where things were set.
Yeah, it was, that was still really kind of iffy because especially the earliest stuff, like I said, it was so unstable. You could set all the knobs in exactly the same place, and you wouldn't get exactly the same thing back. As a matter of fact, you could leave those knobs there, turn the machine off. When you come back and turn it on, as the thing heated up, it'd be different. So it's, but the equipment got better, and really. For me, one of the things about electronic music early on was that it was very much a process that, I was talking about the blip and the squeak, they were made by controlling all these modules that a synthesizer would have. And in order to create a sound, you started with a module that made a tone. If you wanted that tone to stop, you had to send it through another module that would be an amplifier. And with that amplifier, kind of counterintuitively, you could turn the sound off. And then if you wanted it to turn off gradually, you would use an envelope generator to control this amplifier. So it would, or maybe it would come on slowly. And if you wanted to change the timbre of it, you'd run it through a filter, so it would go, and how fast you want it to do that, you needed a module for every aspect of every sound that you made. And Patrick was working in this environment where any given, all those kind of sounds, each was had to be put together with these synthesizer modules, and Patrick didn't always understand exactly what every one of these modules or what every knob on one of these modules did, but he had taste. He would fiddle with it until he found the thing that he liked that turned him on, and he would use that. Later on, synthesizers became programmable, and they became polyphonic. Early on, you would make one sound at a time, and I equate it to just imagine if you wanted to speak, but you had to think about every muscle you were going to use, and first you filled your lungs with air, and then you let it out slowly, and you tensed your vocal cords and to get them to vibrate, and then as the sound passed through your mouth, you operated your lips and your tongue. You had to think about what you were going to do with your lips and tongue. And imagine every sound you made, you had to think out the process like this. So that was what every one of those sounds early on with the synthesizer was like. And so everything became very premeditated, and not so much in the way it came out, but you had to think about this stuff. Every sound was very distinct and deliberate. That's the word I'm looking for. At a certain point, the synthesizers became programmable, and you could, all those diagrams he was making, marking stuff, you no longer needed to do that. The synthesizer was stable. You could get right back to the same thing, and it sort of took some of the fun out of it because it became cheaper in a way. It was less labor involved with it, and then they became polyphonic. And you could do all those things. Instead, Patrick, every one of those things, if you heard a harmony in it, he had to play 2 tracks with it. Everything that happened polyphonically, he had to play each part individually. Then we got polyphonic synthesizers, and the synthesizer became like another keyboard. It was just like an organ or anything else, and the sounds, the nature of electronic music changed quite a bit there. That was probably by about 1981, 82, and the character of electronic music became different. It became integrated into the sort of regular pop music, and it didn't have the kind of special deliberate quality that Patrick stuff, or the other artists that were doing stuff at the time that we talk about Giorgio Moroder or somebody like that in the dance music, but there were other artists like Isao Tomita, who was doing classical music with synthesizers, and but each one of those sounds is so carefully crafted, and that's kind of part of the charm of what Patrick was doing early on, is because it was difficult. It took a lot of work to do not just the music, but to create the sounds, to make the music with. So it was a different time for music technology, I think, and that shows in the work of the time. I don't think we'll get back to that because it's like the genie's out of the bottle at this point.
Can I ask you? You were referring to an artist a couple of sentences ago.
I didn't catch the name.
Well, I mentioned two. One was Giorgio Moroder, the dance guy, and the other one was Isao Tomita. Tomita is a Japanese synthesizer guy. Check out his Debussy album, "The Snowflakes Are Dancing." Or he also did Firebird, I think. They're absolutely gorgeous recordings, all done with synthesizers. This is just post Switched On Bach. And Switched On Bach was Wendy Carlos's version of mostly Bach quartet chorales, and that were done all with Moogs. And that was, you see the pictures of him at the time with this massive synthesizer setup, and with just dozens and dozens of these modules to create each one of those sounds, and in order to do these Bach pieces. And, yeah.
Maybe one more question. Who's got a question? Right here, you have an answer.
Were there any geographical places in San Francisco, or like geological, like weather events or anything that were like natural things that inspired Patrick about the San Francisco Bay Area?
Great question.
Well, he did a lot of stuff. I would naturally gravitate towards the kind of theaters and stuff that he worked with, like the Cockettes, or what was the show he did that had Divine in it? That was
Heartbreak of Psoriasis.
Heartbreak of Psoriasis. I want it all. Those were done down in North Beach, right? And then of course the bathhouses, the actual buildings, most of them I don't think are even there at this point. The barracks burned down.
Yeah.
And but the Jaguar bookstore. The other, I guess the locations. Our initial studio was out on Plymouth Street in the Ingleside. And that was a funky house. I think that it's probably been torn down and something else put up in its place. And the Patrick's house on on 17th Street, and then another one on Collins. No, I was Corbett, and our main studio was at 8th and Minna, which is still there, a brick building. It's although I think it's been bought and gutted on the inside. That was a cool studio that we shared it with a Chinese laundry on one side, and we were loud. That building was just pounding all the time, and so Patrick had one side, and Art and I had the other side of the ground floor, which was right next to the cleaners. And upstairs we rented space to a couple of other megatone artists, Jolo. They had a space up there, and there was another band. Jorge Saracas had a band up there, and the whole place was just, and we couldn't have had a more ideal neighbor than the Chinese laundry. They had a compressor that was in the back that was so loud they couldn't hear any of us, or either that, they just didn't care. It was perfect. Yeah, it would be like living next door to Studio Instrument Rentals or one of those. There were districts in South of Market that were really music districts at the time. There was that space down on. You cut me off whenever you're ready. This is there was that space down around 4th and Folsom. I think it was 4th and Folsom or 4th and Bryant, where on one side of the street there was CBS recording, which became the Automat, and on the other side was Studio Instrument Rentals, where everybody, all the big touring acts, would rehearse and rent their gear from. And next to that was Stars Guitars, the same guys who build instruments for the Grateful Dead, and it was just a bunch of little businesses all right there in this one little block area. All of it gone now, but it was but you'd be in any one of those shops, and you just don't know who you'd run into at the time. It was it was an exciting time. That was the era Patrick was of the areas. I guess that would probably be the most. I'm trying to remember the ice cream shop you worked at.
That was Gaylord's.
Gaylord's.
He scooped ice cream at Gaylord's ice cream. Too fitting. I think that was in. Oh gosh, I think it was in the Mission actually.
Gaylord's?
Yeah.
Was it on Church?
Church or Market?
Church, something like that, yeah.
It was.
I might have, no, I'm not mixing it with me.
I think, maybe it was a chain. He lived in the Castro up until he passed away, so he was kind of, once he got some money, he left, the other neighborhoods he was in and bought a house in the Castro, which also was where Sylvester lived.
Right.
At the time.
Right, Marty and Marty
Blevin, Megatone Records is actually now Strut, where everyone goes to get their tests. Where you get your test is literally Megatone Records. Same office where you get all your blood drawn, that's literally where Megatone Records offices were. It's the same exact floor and building.
Good times.
Little bit of trivia.
Yeah, I think that was a really wonderful final question.